Hi, I'm Rex with Pure Choice Motorsports. Today I'm going to give you a few tips on installing the three-piece reusable fitting on braided stainless Teflon lined hose. If you're unfamiliar, this is that dreaded three-piece fitting that maybe you've heard about. It looks like one piece in my hand, it's actually three. You have the fitting itself, you have the nut, and you have the brass cone or olive as it's called. And so these comprise the three pieces of a three-piece reusable fitting, and we're going to install that on some braided stainless Teflon lined hose. So first thing I'm going to do is cut my hose to length. I've got a piece here I'm going to wrap with my electrical tape. I'm going to cut this hose to length in my Beverly shear. Make sure you cut it as squarely as possible. There we have a nice clean cut. I'm going to get rid of this piece. And the process is going to be, the first step that I need to do is I need to get this nut on that hose. And you can tell that I've squished the hose a little bit. As I ran it through the Beverly shear, it's no longer round, it's kind of flattened. So I'm going to take my fingers. I can also take a pair of pliers if necessary. And I want to gently make that hose round enough again, just gently squeeze it back so that I can install this nut over the hose. The best way that I've found to do it is to set the nut face down, thread side down, and then push the hose through the nut like so. Now we have the nut over the hose. Next step is I'm going to remove my tape. So I'm going to peel that electrical tape off. And this is the tricky part. The next piece that I need to install is this brass olive. And it's tapered. It has a little shoulder on one side. The hose is actually going to slide in this direction, and that Teflon liner is going to bottom out against that little lip on the inside of that brass olive. So in order to make that happen, I've got to separate the braided stainless from the Teflon liner. This is my preferred screwdriver for performing this task, and I'm just going to gently go around the hose, and I'm going to push those braids back away from the Teflon liner until I can get my screwdriver tip in between the stainless braid and the Teflon liner. And I'm just kind of working that back slowly until I've exposed enough of the Teflon liner that I can install that brass olive over the liner. Looking pretty good. I've got a little part right there that's a little tight yet, so I'm going to work that back. Again, I don't want to separate the braid from the liner clear back to here, but I do need to make room for that olive to fit over the liner under the braid. That looks pretty good. It's not perfectly round. I like to use a punch to sort of round that out a little bit. I want to be really careful. If I go too deep with the punch, I'm going to stretch the liner to the point where the liner is going to be too big to fit the brass olive over it. So at this point, I think I'm round enough. I can maybe get that guy to go in there. So I'm carefully going to, there, felt it slide on. I have the brass olive pushed over the Teflon liner, and it's starting underneath of the braid. So I'm going to stand it up on the table like so and push down, and I'm going to try to seat that Teflon liner into the brass olive as far as it'll go, so you can see that it's bottomed out against the lip on the inside of that olive. Okay, that looks really nice. Now I'm going to take my punch and I'm going to go in and I'm going to smooth that Teflon liner out against, and this is a little smaller punch, it goes in a little farther. I'm going to smooth that Teflon liner just like so. Okay, so I have two of my three pieces of that three-piece fitting installed on the hose. Now it's time for the fitting itself. This part's called a nipple. I'm going to dip it in just a freckle of, I use transmission fluid to lubricate it a little bit, and I'm going to slide that piece as I'm rotating it, sliding it through the brass ferrule, brass olive, into the Teflon hose. There it goes, just like that. So now I'm ready to install the nut on the fitting. Again, I like to use just a little bit of transmission fluid to lubricate the threads on the fitting. And I'm ready to start that nut on the fitting itself. So slide the nut up, gently turn it until I feel threads start to engage. And now I'm going to take this to my vise. I'm going to use my soft jaws in my vise. I'm going to install hose down, and I'm going to clamp the nut into the soft jaws of my vise. I'm not going to over tighten it. If I over tighten it, I'll tend to squish that nut and it won't be round anymore. So now I'm going to take my wrench and I'm going to start turning the fitting into the hose. So as I'm tightening that up, I'm compressing that assembly inside there. And one of the problems that we encounter with this process is most guys will tend to tighten that all the way up, and it was never designed to be tightened completely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten this fitting into the nut until I have roughly the thickness of my thumbnail. So I'm going to put my thumbnail in between the nut and the fitting, and that's how tight it's going to be. Just till I feel it touch the top of my thumbnail. And we're about there. Maybe just a little bit more. There we go. That fitting now is completely assembled. It won't leak and it won't blow apart. But you see I have a tiny bit of gap between the nut on the fitting and the body of the fitting itself, about a thumbnail's thickness. The fitting is good to go. I can install it on the car. I can use it as it is. The reason that we leave that thumbnail thickness between the fitting and the nut is it allows me about 240 or so degrees of additional rotation. This particular three-piece fitting is a 45-degree fitting, and let's assume I was putting a 90-degree fitting on the other end. We have clocking that comes into play. This fitting needs to be pointed in a certain direction, and this fitting would need to be pointed in a different direction. So leaving that gap in there initially allows me to continue to tighten, and I get about 240 degrees more rotation out of it. We'll try that and we'll prove that in just a second. If I had a straight fitting on this end of the hose, then clocking is not a concern, because this fitting can turn and allows this fitting to be clocked in any direction that it needs to be. But assuming that we're going to put another angled fitting on this end of the hose, clocking is a concern. So this fitting is done. It's good to go. I'm going to show you that I still have some clockability or indexability left on that fitting. So right now, my wrench is pointed. I'm going to stand on this side so the wrench is pointed directly towards me. I'm going to continue tightening. There's about 90 degrees. There's about 180 degrees. And I can bring that all the way around. Not quite 360, but well past 270. 280 or so is where I'm at there from where I started. Remember, my wrench was pointing towards me. So that allows me to clock the fitting. So we've got now the fitting is assembled. The fitting is screwed into the nut tightly. The biggest mistake that people make is they get to this point, they take the hose assembly to the car, and they realize that this fitting isn't pointed in exactly the right direction. So because they've tightened it up all the way, they can't turn it clockwise anymore. It's tight. So that what they'll do is they'll take the wrench and they'll back it up just a freckle to get it to align in the correct direction. You can't back it up at all. If you back up, turn this counterclockwise any at all, then we have destroyed the ferrule or the brass olive inside the fitting. So because I turned this just a little bit counterclockwise, I've got to start over. This fitting's got to come apart. I've got to install a new brass olive, and I've got to go again. So just remember, leave that thumbnail gap between the nut and the fitting as you're tightening it up. That'll leave you anywhere from 240 to 300 degrees or so of additional rotation clockwise so that you can get the fitting headed in the correct direction. Don't ever turn it counterclockwise. Counterclockwise, and you get to start over again. So hopefully that's been helpful to you installing that 3-piece reusable fitting. We do a lot of them here, so it's not something that's uncommon to us, but to the most guys don't particularly like to install that. And hopefully we've shared with you some of the challenges and some of the solutions for dealing with that. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and check back, and we'll make some additional videos in the future.